Oh, well, I mean, I think for me, the heart of the sense of urgency is, it's not even a sense of not wanting to waste time, but I was not going to waste my gifts. You know, my sense was, if I have these gifts and I am here and I'm going to use them, and when I am feeling the impulse to understand things, to try to explain them, to tell a story, I just didn't feel like I couldn't waste that. So I do think it was feeling a sense of mortality quite young that produced a sense of urgency
And that urgency would allow you to work through pain.
Oh yeah.
Work through
excruciating pain, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's also the tradition. I mean, and I don't want to romanticize it, but I mean, all of our folks work through pain. We grew up with that. We grew up with people going to work every day, physically suffering, emotionally suffering, psychologically. We witness that.
How does that show up in your work? So I mean, you can tell the story. We don't want to be romantic about it, right? You're right, but how does it show? How does it show up on the page?
It's beautiful, though. It shows up on the page. I try to tell it true. Like I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to account for it and also listen. I don't know. I know that's a sort of rambling way. It's not coherent, but I want to tell a story in a way that the aching of the arthritis, as it were, right, my own, but also my grandmother's, my mother's, that the aching of the arthritis,
yeah.
is not just described, but is evident even in the rhythm of the sentence. What is it? I mean, this is part of what we do in our music, right? Like when you can hear breath in the trumpet player, you can hear the exertion, right? This is when you can see the sweat. This is the hardest. This is James Brown, the hardest working. Like there is a struggle with. It's not just sort of, we talk about kind of these extraordinary moments of artistic achievement, but there's a tradition of taking into account pain and suffering in it. It's part of the genius. We're doing this. And when doing this, not just, we can do this even with the pain and suffering, but it's an act of love for oneself, for one's people, to continue to do things that are extraordinary in the thick of the suffering.
Right. Because I asked the question because when I read you, I read you at the level of argument.
Yeah.
Right, so there are claims being made.
There's lots of argument, yeah, but there's also the formal piece.
There's the formal piece too, right, where there's the form, but then there's the form actually comes to the reader, at least it comes to me as a reader, as felt.
Yes.
There's sentences in South to America, there's sentences in Breathe, there's sentences in Looking for Lorraine, right, that are, and we can, May We Forever Stand. Yes, but
less so, yeah.
But I'm just saying the arc of the work. There's the sentences that are making claims that are working on several different levels.
That's very deliberate.
And it's very deliberate. So talk a little bit about, for me at least, I'm trying to get at something because you said the urgency that has everything to do with the sense of mortality, right? That has everything to do with taking care of folk, which has everything to do with one's sense of calling and vocation. And for you, particularly being located in this tradition that you're constantly claiming, that you're constantly delving deeper into its contours in some ways. But when I read you now, it's actually much more explicit on the page.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but I don't know how many years ago this was. Maybe it's been maybe 13. No, maybe not quite that many. Maybe 11 years ago. You're really pushing me to get out of drawing these clean distinctions between intellect and emotion.
Cornell's old office. Yes. In Stanhope Hall.
That's right. And I was talking about how important it was for me. I wanted to connect. I wanted to think about the emotional register. And I was being, in some ways, very dismissive of...
This is early stages of Vexy.
Yes.
Right.
And you were like, that distinction doesn't hold, right? And you were talking about Cartesian anxieties and stuff that was, no, it wasn't all above my head, but it was, but you were actually delving into a philosophical tradition, explaining to me why that distinction I was making was a product of a kind of training I had had as a scholar, but didn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really helpful for me, because what it allowed for me to do was to actually think about the way in which, I think this is true in general, but thought is so, it has a sensory component, it always has an emotional component, and to try to be honest about that and to actually use that as part of my craft as a writer. Because oftentimes you can connect to people emotionally, and they will come with you intellectually if you connect with them emotionally. And they can, and it is a way of, it provides a way of understanding, right? So, and I use this example all the time with the sugar, with the way, the way that we love sugar, and in the South, and that you can have an analytic about what sugar does to your body, and it's addictive, and this sort of in the industry and the like, but then there's also how it feels. It soothes when you feel, beaten down and exhausted and diminished. And so if there's a way to get to that as a way of understanding why economic exploitation is so terrible, right? That's what I want, that's what I want to get to. I want to convince people, but I want to convince people through the gut.
Yeah.
And even more than the heart, through the gut.
It's like that moon pie. The moon pies and
yes.
the miners, right?
Yes.
In South to America, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know this is not an interview of you, but I got to
ask.
ask.
Yeah, because I am about to ask you a question, but yes, okay.
Okay, but I have to ask you this question though. Given the urgency, given the arc, the kind of the sensory nature of the sentence on the page, given the world in which you're writing all of this stuff, what are you most afraid of now? What is the fear at the heart?
Oh, see, I'm a crybaby, so I'm going to try to answer this without crying.
Yes, you are.
I am afraid that I don't know what to offer young people now. And what I mean is, I don't, it's the cascade, it is it's the backlash, it's the Trump era, it's the COVID, it's the institutions, the world has been cruel, but the environmental threat, the political threat, the ways, the fracturing, I feel very concerned about how to be useful for helping them think about the way forward after we're gone. That terrifies me. Because as someone who thinks so much in terms of tradition, as someone who thinks so much about what elders taught, who thinks so much about how do we pass things on, it's very hard for me to understand what's going on now. Does that make sense?
Say more. That, by the way, the clock didn't stop.
Oh, okay.
Start. Say more.
Like, do you know, I feel like, and this, I'm going to turn this on you, but I feel like, the era in which we came of age, which is often, in some ways, dismissed as an era of a kind of organizing, but there was a lot of organizing. We did a lot of sort of thinking about a variety of issues, right?
Right.
And to do so with the shadow of the civil rights generation always over us, right? And to try to think, how do we think about these things? How do we organize ourselves? What I mean is, I don't know about whether the appeals to justice have whether people will be moved by them, And even if they are, because the power is concentrated in such a small number of people's hands, wealth and power and weapons, the sense of the possibility of turning a tide feels more remote to me now than any point in history, and that feels terrifying to me.